Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semigog. I'm joined this evening by my good friend, JollyScholar888. He has a channel that he has recently launched, and I've spread the word about it over on Twitter a few times, sending people over to check out an excellent new 3-part series that he has put up on Pete Seeger and on ideology and music and all these intertwining strands. I won't try to lay it out because he does quite a good job of it over in those clips, but I would recommend everybody check out his channel. That's JollyScholar888, like you see his name written there. And what else? Yes, before we get started, our discussion, which will be about Cuba and JollyScholar888's reflections upon Cuba. And JollyScholar888, may I call you by your Christian name?
Gerardo, yeah.
Okay, good. We will talk.
Pregnant saying to pregnant women.
There will be we will cover this subject of the Cuban Revolution and some of its after effects and some of Gerard's experiences, his family's experiences with all of that. I expect we'll talk for an hour or two, and maybe if it's all right with you, Gerard, we'll take some questions at the end.
Yeah.
Before we get started, please do follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as a safer space. You can do that on BitChute. You can do that on YouTube. Again, there are 2 channels. There's also Minds. There's Gab. There's Telegram. And there is Twitter. You can follow me there. For those who wish to support the channel, there is GoFundMe. And there is Subscribestar. I am not going to show the GoFundMe the Praetorian Chads who support this channel just tonight, because I realize there are several people who have just jumped in to support the channel. Palooka, BR Goldsmith, Reichenhaller, Michigan Wave, several people have jumped in, and I need to add their names to the list. So mea maxima culpa for not having done so, but with the next episode next week, I will have all those names added, and I will celebrate the people who make this channel possible. Thank you all of the credit and none of the blame. Your names are written on the tablet of life. There's been a wardrobe malfunction that we will shortly address. So yeah, last shilling. It's my science fiction book, Vinculum. It's a sci-fi novel set in a dystopian future about a book thief and corporate hitman and a sect of heterodox assassins from the East.
I'm reading it.
Oh, that's right. Did you get yourself a copy?
I'm halfway through. It's great.
Excellent. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. And then this is my collection of poems.
Development.
Nice. And this is Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. This is my collection of poems. You can find this on Amazon as well. That's under Oliver Timken-Perrin. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I think covers my shilling. Gerard is a...
Tell them what the cover is. I don't think most people know. That color is that is such a cool image. They just don't, if they knew what it was, yeah.
This is there was a Turkish friend of mine many years back who gave me this. I think it's a silver gelatin print or whatever, but it's an exhibit from some sort of Ottoman military briefing, and it has a sequence of photos for how a donkey, bir eşek, is loaded up with a Bofors mountain cannon that's been disassembled. So when thinking about youth and its foolishness, I didn't think there was any more emblematic image than a donkey bearing a howitzer or, some small artillery and wearing blinders. It seemed to represent my experience of youth quite, yeah, thank you, Gerard. See, you prize these things out of me. I've known Gerard for many years indeed. I think I met him when I was 16. And yeah, some time back.
Yeah.
And so I know that Gerard is no big fan of the commies, which I think speaks well of him. Having a PhD and coming out of academia and not liking commies, that means he's
how did that happen, huh?
Yeah, one of the very rare, one of the few and far between. So this evening, I wanted to see if he could talk about what happened in Cuba, the revolution there, and as I said, his perspective on it, his family's perspective, and maybe some lessons learned about it. Before we get started, Gerard, I was thinking of just sort of giving people an introduction of what happened for somebody, perhaps they're out there, people who have just no idea what that revolution was. If you could really quickly summarize it. and then maybe tell us a little bit about your family and their experience. And we can just sort of take it from there.
Well, the Cuban Revolution was, Cuba had gone through one stage after another ever since its independence war. That was the war with the United States came in on it against Spain, where Roosevelt did the Rough Riders and all that.
And that's the explosion of the Maine that was put together by Hearst and all that.
Yeah, with the explosion of the Maine was like the trigger. Some people suspect that we did it on purpose. Other people say we didn't, but whatever. It's all because if we did, then that goes along with the 9/11 sort of conspiracies. But
or the rape of the nuns in Belgium, or that sort of thing. Yeah, and World War One. Except
that it really did blow up. I mean, that's for sure. And so after that revolution, Spain has gone through Cuba through a series of trying to achieve complete independence between America, first it was Spain, the United States, and then different power brokers coming onto the island, and nothing ever quite working out. Now, I have to preface that with Cuba has an incredible national feeling. One thing that you'll learn if you ever come around Cubans is, first as my cousin Armando would say this a lot, that we have a very mixed family, right? Because Cuba is just that way. But if you would ask a Cuban, a black Cuban, are you black or more Cuban? It's Cuban. People probably find it odd that this island there has this powerful sense of nationhood and of self-identity, but it's really strong. And if you ever get around Cubans, sit around and talk with them, you'll see what I mean. It's not subtle. They're very, very nationalistic. So this struggle has been going on for quite a while, and one bad actor after another kept coming into power. Now, if you want to, there's a series, I think it's on Netflix, about Cuba, and it's the best introduction you could possibly have to the history of Cuba, rather than me try to go through that now.
Really?
So let's say what happened with the Castro Revolution, right?
From Netflix, really? That's surprising.
It's very good. Well, I've been watching a couple of things. The story of the Medicis on Netflix, excellent, shockingly good. I'm watching one now on the Qin, the rise of the Qin Empire. And I told you I've read the Annals of Sima Qian. That's which documents the rise of the Qin, and then the Qin was just one dynasty. And I think that the second generation already crumbled, and then was the rise of the Han. Anyways, it's a fascinating story, but I digress. So Castro, well, if I actually talk about it from my background, you'll get a better picture of the revolution. So let's start with my grandfather, Alvaro Moreno. He was a epic kind of character. Let's go to the whole. My family was not a wealthy family. They were scholars, educators, and politicians only to a very limited degree, in that they would rise into a political position only because they were so respected by the people, that none of them were professional.
So could you say they were middle class?
Yes, they would be middle class. And then when my grandfather was put as in Cuba, the police force is like like we have National Guard, Army. Well, Cuba had a very small army. So the police force was a national police force, and my father was put in charge of my grandfather. At that point, the house my mother grew up in was a little bit on the opulent side, actually. It was a little bit. I once saw a picture of her dressed in a Chiquita Banana outfit. I'm going, Mom, what's that? You're staying? What is that? The library? That's my house. I'm going, holy guacamole. But that's not how the family was in general. They were, professionals. Some of them military. One of them was a doctorate in the Navy. But Alvaro Moreno was very specific. Doctors were very prominent, and very well loved. When one of my great grandfathers died, all the people in the surrounding towns came and carried his coffin to the cemetery because he was so beloved. He wouldn't charge he never charged the poor. He just charged the wealthy. It was kind of a system.
That would seem to be borne out by the focus for quite some time now on physicians and doctors coming from Cuba, them attempting to export their medical expertise, pushing that as a talking point about the communist regime.
They really perverted that because Cuba was known for its doctors. One of my relatives is the one that developed a vaccine for polio in Cuba. Another one died real young from watching the stars, and he was an academic that just kind of almost became anorexic. There's a lot of interesting stories, but Alvaro Moreno was very interesting. He father was a judge. He fell afoul of one of the political entities, and he had to flee. And he became he was a cavalry officer with the Mexican army. He was in New York at one time where he was a light opera singer. So this guy was that kind of guy who could sing, had a beautiful voice, could sing, and then, get on a horse and take a saber out. And then he got bit by, I think, a scorpion or a tarantula. Then they had to leave him for a while, and he was left with Native Americans from Mexico. Then on this one it's called the let's see, the Expedición de, oh my gosh, it'll come to me. But when Castro landed, that expedition was ambushed, right? And this is later. So I'm going pre-Castro now. So my grandfather was involved in another revolution, and they were also ambushed.
Castro's landing was after he'd already attempted to take some barracks and had been put in jail and then released, and then he went away, and then
came back, exactly. And there's a very good book on the story of Fidel Castro, which is also very interesting. He's an interesting guy. I mean, he is. His father was interesting too. Came from Spain, had nothing, and by hook and crook, made himself a place in life. And actually, Castro was somewhat illegitimate. He was the son of one of the maids.
Just out of curiosity, do you know what part of Spain Castro came from?
Yes. Let me see if I remember correctly. He might have been a Gallego from Galicia. I'm not sure. Look that up. I didn't do much homework for this. I should have. But
no
if
worries.
I'm not mistaken, he was a Gallego.
Let's see. Early life and career. Out of wedlock at his father's farm. From Galicia. Yeah. Okay. So he's a Gallego. He's a Celt, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, he was what, like 6'2" or something? So he was rather large for a Cuban, I would guess.
Castro. Well, my other grandfather was too. Cubans come in all sizes and shades. That's kind of a misnomer that they're all. But yeah, well, one of my uncles is very short, so yeah, they come in all sizes and shades.
Yeah, as I recall, your mother is very fair, correct?
Right. The other grandfather was blonde, green eyes. Alvaro Moreno is dark-haired with dark eyes.
Okay, and so I'm sorry I cut you off with that business about
he was involved in
the main thing I'm concerned about is make sure that a picture comes out about the events there. So
I'm leading up to the revolution. This is like pre that revolution. So he was for the Expedición de Rivera. They were also ambushed. He was dressed up as a priest and smuggled out. He knew how to fake the Mexican accent. And so he got out alive and went to, was singing light opera, blah, 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 blah. So we go on. So, but by the time we get to the to the Castro Revolution, my grandfather was the head of police of Cuba under Batista, but he was not a Batistero at all. In fact, my family loved Fidel Castro, and they were totally, totally pro-revolution. All of them. In fact, but he had to retire. Batista came to power, and my dad was there courting my mother. My dad was from Georgia, and this is a very interesting, their story is fascinating too. But anyway, so he was there when the limousines pulled up, and some armed guys and kind of an official doctor, and they could have shot him. I mean, Alvaro was very brave, and so he would sit on his front porch waiting, whatever they were going to do. He was fine. And he was notorious for always having an impeccably white suit that never had a spot on it. He was notorious for that. And so he's sitting there, and Dad is over, and they come over. The limousine pulls up. The guys come out, and some guys in the shady suits, and all they did was have him sign something that said he's got a medical problem and he needs to retire. So I guess he got off easy. So by the time I met my grandfather, he was retired in a place called Santa Fe, Cuba, Santa Fe de la Playa, which is down from Havana.
The whole point there was simply that your ancestor there, as a part of the previous power structure, had to step down.
Right.
And that's smoothly how they
stepped down by Batista, not by Castro. He was already, by the Castro Revolution, my grandfather was already retired. This was his retirement. So he was there in Santa Fe. All right, so as a little nose picker, I go to Cuba to first grade. I went to first grade in Cuba, and the revolution had just happened. It was very fresh, and so I'm going to start telling you some stories so you get some background. But first of all, your audience needs to know that everybody supported the revolution. It was not a class revolution. Middle class, upper class, poor people. My family, like I said, was upper middle class and middle class, and a lot of them were professionals. And women back then, women in Cuba were very, very autonomous. I have several aunts that owned, like one of them had a gym. I could go on and on. You can ask me questions about the family because there's so much to say that I wouldn't know where to start. But so my mother's family was very well known. When my mother got married to my father, it was in the papers. The family was that well known. But they were totally supporters of Castro. My grandmother loved Fidel Castro. I mean, it was almost, and she died in Miami, of course, hating his guts, as so many of them did. But the audience really needs to know that that revolution was supported by all the classes, including my family was completely supporting him. So while I was there, things started to smell. And my mother was one of the first ones to pick it up, but so did other people. In fact, one of them was one of the guys that I think it was he was we call it campesino. He worked for the family, was not terribly educated, but he could already smell a rat.
And let me ask, at what point was this? Because as I understand it, first Fidel Castro tried to do some things. He tried to take over some sort of arsenal. A bunch of people got shot. He got thrown in prison. It was supposed to be for a long time.
That's the history of Fidel Castro's revolution.
Right. But I'm laying this out for the audience, and I'm going to try and pinpoint along
when
this line.
When he was in college, he pulled that trick, and it backfired. And for some reason, Batista didn't kill him. And not only did he put him in jail, but then he let him out.
Right.
He put him in history. They think his father pulled some strings, but his father was not that. I mean, his father was not wealthy. I mean, it's hard to imagine. I don't think anybody's properly really explained why Batista let Fidel out, but he did.
I'd have to guess international pressure, but then I don't know shit about it. But so he gets let out, and he, along with some other people, head off to Mexico or something, and they decide then
Mexico. They went around getting money. They hooked up with Che Guevara and others.
Right, and then they get on this ship and they come back, and when they come back and they're trying to land, they some of them get shot up, but some of them escape up into the mountains, and they put together this military, and they have this sort of two-pronged movement up to the north to attack some of these towns or cities.
When they come out, they do the two-pronged. They're up in the mountains, and Che's really good with the microphone and the radio, they're gathering more and more support.
And I forgot, they Batista sent some troops up who actually, a lot of them get absorbed by the communists, which supports your. Now
they're not communists yet. Remember, they never say anything about communists.
So at that point, they're the resistance.
It's a patriotic revolution at this point.
Right, and so then a bunch of the military defect, and then they head north to attack these towns, and then, they head north to take the towns, but generally they're welcomed. And then somehow they seize control. That's what little I know.
But first they're up in the mountains for a while doing raids, back and forth raids. But the Batisteros, whenever they got some of Castro's men, they would machine gun them, the bodies, just to leave them there as a warning. It wasn't enough just to shoot them. They would just riddle them with machine guns because they had lots and lots of bullets, whereas Castro's men didn't. And so there's lots of pictures of that, of Castro's men laying in the ground, strewn over like a dirt road, and they're just riddled with bullet holes. So this goes on for a while, and then finally they've got enough support, and then they do the two-prong thing.
And then they sort of take over. But now, where is?
It's almost like Castro goes to Santiago, which is to the far end, west end of the island. The east end. And oddly enough, Castro, because he's from Santiago, he goes to Santiago, which was not as important. Camilo Cienfuegos, which was a very, he was really beloved by the people. Camilo Cienfuegos means 100 fires. That's a place in Cuba. Him and Che went directly towards Havana, but Castro didn't, which was weird. Castro went to Santiago and let Che and Camilo go to Havana. So when the big entrance into Havana happened, actually it was Che and Santiago and Camilo. Then Castro joined them.
Okay, so then one thing I add in is that apparently during that time when they're in the mountains, they got a lot of international press. The press loved them, wanted to talk about them, amplify their voices. And so we can sort of see the collusion between proto-communists or crypto-communists and the press at that early point. Now, absolutely. I just wanted to bring that up, but the whole reason I went off, forgive me, on this digression is because
our press by then, we didn't know it, but our press was always already polluted, well polluted.
I'm sure, but now the reason that I bring this up is because you just mentioned that things started to smell when you were there. So I've sketched up to the point when they march north and get accepted and they begin to take power. And you just pointed out where they start to smell. So can you cover the distance very quickly between where we stopped when they came north and this point when you're there and they started to smell, so people can contextualize where this is in the timeline? Right.
So my mother, my family love him, and he starts a little bit of the anti-Americanism now. And I was, how Cuban do I look, right? I mean, people could spot me a mile away. So even though my mother's Cuban and my father's American, they were light-skinned Cubans anyways. And now they wouldn't have known that except in the small town of Santa Fe. People realized later on that I was American. So there did a lot of marches through the streets. I wouldn't call it quite processions, but parades like. And then we started hearing the chants, Cuba si, Yankee no, Cuba yes, Yankees no.
Oh, okay, hang on. What happened between when Che and this other guy, Cienfuegos or whatever his name is, and Castro is sort of lingering behind? What happened between then and where you're talking about now? What's the time frame difference?
It's very, very shortly after.
Okay. I mean, I'm so that's about where we are.
Yeah. I mean, they had been ruling maybe a year, maybe something like that, and maybe 56, and it's about 58, so maybe 2. And things start to happen. So now these are things that I witnessed and my mother. So now I can tell you things that really did happen. So
they're marching.
Camilo Cienfuegos suddenly disappears. He's in this supposedly an airplane thing and this and that. And people, and I remember we were in a bus going to school, and all of a sudden everywhere erupted this everybody was honking their horns, and because the rumor came out that Camilo had reappeared, that he was okay. And I think that was Castro and them testing the waters, and he realized, wow, he's really that big. So it turned out to be false, right? You never heard of him again. He died. They never got his body either. This is a guerrilla fighter, right? Disappears on and I thought it was actually up in the mountains on a trip. Now they said it was a plane crash, but nothing was ever found, nothing. So that's the end of Camilo Cienfuegos. So things start to look a little weird already. Then my mother, there's a lady named Clarissa Parks. She was she was American, spoke Spanish with a pretty bad accent, but everybody knew her in Havana. And she ran the American newspaper there. And in fact, my mother likes to tell the story. She had her first Shirley Temple, but actually, no, her first alcoholic beverage was with Clarissa Parks, who said, well, you're a lady now. I think she was like 16. Here's your birthday. And she gave her first little drink, and mom was all thrilled, about that. But Clarissa Parks is very well known. And she had this newspaper. It was a big building. So, but she was not flattering Fidel. She was publishing things that were critical, at least honest, And one day a truck goes by, they just riddle the whole building with machine gun fire. So she gets the picture, right? And gets out of there. But my grandmother still, no, Fidel, the family, they loved him. Then there was a joke that went around like this, and it goes, well, She's a communist. And then he goes, no, Fidel's not a communist. Then they go, well, Raul's a communist. Nah, Castro's not a communist. And then they would name some other fulanos a communist. Nah, and then the punchline was, well, since when is the madame of a whorehouse a virgin? So it starts to looking weird. And then he has everybody vote not to vote. I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. He told them all, well, why do we need to vote? We know where we're going. We know what we're doing. And yeah. And so, yeah, they voted not to vote. You can only vote, as you know, in the communist system, the only people that can vote are people in the party, and you only get into the party by being invited. You don't join the party. You have to get invited. So you have to demonstrate how brown your nose is, and that's a euphemism, before you can get in the party and vote. And then even then, there's an inner. Well, it was just him and his family. That's what it was. So so things start to deteriorate slowly, and then my mother finally says, "Okay, I got to get out of here." So my mother was very brave. She gets us little, all three of us rascals, and decides she's going to leave. All the family got onto her. You're a mala cubana. You're a bad Cuban. What do you mean you're going? Because see, my father at the time was in Korea, and he was in the military now. They weren't when they married, and that's all. Again, it's a very romantic story how they met and all that. So my father's in Korea. So my mother gets us, and we get on. We're going to the plane, and you know let me tell you this. You'll like this story. So we're standing. My grandfather's house had a porch, wraparound porch. My uncle was much younger, right? Because Abuelo was my step grandfather, and the Abuelo Sanchez Pesino was the blood grandfather. So Abuelo is that's the grandfather that I grew up with. His house had this wraparound porch, and then so I had an uncle that was only at that time I was about. I know you're thinking, how can I remember all this? I remember stuff really well, and I can tell you lots of stuff. For some reason, this stuff just stuck. And at the time, I didn't know how historical this was, but now in retrospect, I do. So he was about 12 or 11 or 13, 12, and they got a little, it was like a Boy Scouts, except that the Cuban, they're getting ready to be part of the party in good, the new Cuba. And so they're marching, they're doing these little drills, and they're playing like they play rifles, and and they're
do you happen to remember if they had red scarves on?
No red scarves. But yeah, we'll talk about those. So yeah, they weren't rednecks. So they're going back and forth, and they're chanting Cuba, si, Yankee, no. And then my little brother, Marcos, is going, Cuba, si, Yankee, no. And I stop and I go, Marcus, we're the Yankees. And my brother goes, we are? It was very weird, right? It was interesting, the whole, and then they were doing it in the streets. And then my mother once remembers that this kid, he was a rotten kid anyways, lived down the street from us. And he starts cursing at me and stuff about me being American, gringo, which was very rare because Americans were loved. I mean, my father was my family, my father's family was humble. My mother's family, as I said, was not. And they loved my dad. My dad to this day is regarded as one of the great patriarchs of the family. So Americans were well loved in Cuba.
And just for the record, I had somebody, I think this is a meme or just somebody being obnoxious. They're asking if you're Jewish. As I understand it, your mother's side of the family is Cuban and Catholic, and your father's side is Georgia Protestant, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think all the Jews about the Cubans being the Jews of the Antilles, because that's why they did so well.
I don't know.
I never met any Jews in Cuba. I mean, we'd have none in the family. Maybe there's one that married. Yeah, I know where that's coming from. No, and none of my family is either. There weren't any Jews at all. As you know, I married one later, but no, there's no Jews in the Cuban side at all. So so where was I? So yeah, they're starting the Cuba si Yankee no, and this kid starts, he had a foul mouth too. And then, but I had already learned to have a really foul mouth. And I came up to the fence and I was just laying into him. And my mother comes out there because he's hearing this stuff coming out of her little kid, that she can't believe I knew this stuff. And then she stopped herself and she goes, and then the kid ran off, and then I come back and she was going to be really angry at me, but she wasn't, because she had heard what the guy was saying about us. And so she just, okay. And she still tells that story to this day, that she was shocked about that I had this vocabulary at such an early age. Anyways, I digress. So there we see things happening, right? Camilo Cienfuegos disappears. That's a bad sign. They start shutting down the press, and if a press doesn't go along with they machine gun the building, and anti-Americanism is starting. So Mom gets us out of there. We take we took a boat. We took a ferry to Miami, and then up to the hills to meet my dad's family up in Georgia. Now, talk about culture shock. This was a riot. But when you're little kids, everything is fun. So here we are in the mountains of Georgia now, from Cuba, and I just we could spend a whole thing just talking about that. But anyway, so there I am, and we did well enough till my father came back.
But the point is that you were there. It was a couple of years into the regime. I mean, I guess we can call it that if they voted not to vote.
Yes, and things are starting to go bad.
And so this is when they were marching in the streets saying, Yankee no,
Cuba yes, Yankee.
While they're doing that, that's roughly around the same time where what's her name's newspaper offices are being machine gunned and the rest, and that's when your family decides to leave. And did you get the sense that everybody was?
Not yet. Just my mother. The rest of the family was angry with her, real angry. But there were a few who kept, who were quietly saying the same thing. In fact, one member, he was like a cousin, had told her, you should get out of here. This is going to get worse. And then there was a Joselito, I said, who was a little, a guy that worked with a family. And he was saying, I'm going to get out of here. This doesn't seem right. So it was like, it wasn't a class. It wasn't like only certain educated people realized it or uneducated people. People across the spectrum were starting to smell a rat. So slowly things got worse, right? Now we're out of the picture. But then finally, my grandmother, grandfather, almost all of them started coming over. And when they came, the regime would take even the wedding rings off their fingers. They could leave with nothing.
As they departed. Huh.
Right. At the airport, whatever. They would insult them and stuff and take everything they had. And that's what they left with, was their clothes and suitcase of.
So it sounds like at that point, was that a class issue, or was the idea that they were bailing from their country and not supporting it? It was
bailing, yeah, because it wasn't. My family happened to have stuff worth taking from them. However, poor people, same thing. And this is shown later on if you go to the Mighty Little Boat Lift, if you ever want to talk about that, and how that happened with the Peruvian embassy. So things started to get really bad slowly and slowly. He tightened the grip. He finally started getting involved with wars in Angola, and Che Guevara eventually couldn't get along with Fidel, and Fidel sends him on this wild goose chase up in Bolivia, where Che Guevara is so obnoxious that the natives can't stand him, and they actually are the ones that informed the Federales of where to find him. Now, curiously enough, or ironically or poetically, one of the guys that he surrendered to and that he then got shot. Oh no, he didn't surrender. When they captured him, was in fact a Cuban who had been at the Bay of Pigs. That's a whole nother story, right? He became a CIA informant, and he was one of the guys that hunted down Che.
Oh, I'll throw a little piece at you. Did you know this? This is just my one little piece of the Cuban world. I think I have it up here. Yes. Doing a search for my father's name within the last couple of years, I discover an FBI archive that's been published. And my father was, this is a little bit later, this is 1962. But the FBI is keeping an eye on all this kind of crazy shit that's going on with Cuba and Cubans who are in the US who want to get involved in all kinds of funky stuff and vice versa. Of course, my mother and father were raised on my brother was raised by my mother and father on a sloop that my father had. They had a sailing ship before they ever had a home.
Yeah.
And my brother was.
You had the wheel to it.
Oh yeah, the ship's wheel. And we do this search over the last, I think it was in the last 3 or 4 years that this was found. And it says, February 24th, 1962. I'm sorry, this is June of 1962. Source advises that such and such Cuban national received telephone call from owner of Mariner. That's my father's ship or sloop. From owner of Mariner, 48-foot boat, which is on its way from Paso Grill Beach, Florida to Naples. Owner advised he had engine trouble, needed money. So why is this coming up? Because they have FBI informants who are watching the people who talk to my dad. And then, in February 24th, it says such and such associate of such and such sent $30 Western Union to Alwyn Perrin. That's my dad. in Florida, apparently to do something with his sloop. God knows he probably got like run aground and had to be towed off a sandbar or something, you know. But there's just that little bit, and then there's one last entry that says one of these main guys, the main like bad guy that the FBI were watching at that point, says such and such contacted the owner of a 65-foot boat previously belonged to the Smithsonian, owned by 3 Americans who live and work on it, how much the boat was purchased for, and then it says have plans for a raid seeking Cubans to captain ship. The Mariner, as of July of '62, located in Fort Myers, Florida, 3 Americans on board, engine trouble. This guy is angry with the Mariner crew. And in my family lore, it was that they were approached by Cubans to bring people over to Cuba on these small,
they were raiding the coast. They were trying to upset the tourist industry, and so they were actually sabotaging and bombing hotels and stuff without killing anybody until one of them went bad and accidentally killed a tourist. That's probably what they were doing. They were trying to commandeer the boat to go make a hit.
I think they were going to pay my dad to have him bring people over to get up to hijinks. But the family story is that someone from some intelligence service or law enforcement came to talk to my father. He wasn't there, and he ran into my mother, who had my infant brother at that time. And he put the word on her, and she put the word on him, and all of that was shut down. So I have my own little dimension of this.
Cool. Yeah.
Who knew my family was in FBI records? That's why I say, man, you never know how many there are who are watching and what they're doing.
And that's that's a bit of a history that most people don't know about. And there is also, I don't know if it's a Netflix one. There's a movie that came out that's a big part of that movie. Was in fact this counter work by expatriate Cubans launching these attacks that were supposedly not really happening and definitely not coming from America. So the stuff really, and then those people who know the Bay of Pigs, my father, I mean, I can't even talk about all this because my father was, military and intelligence. And when my Cuban family came over, finally admitting that, okay, they backed this is terrible. He was there to help them all and give them jobs and things. And then my last cousin, Armando, who is just a riot, he came over only about 12 years ago because Maita, my aunt, had married a fellow, Jorge. And Jorge was a diehard communist, a member of the Communist Party. And so he would let her leave, but not the kids. So she wouldn't leave. So she stayed with the kids. So Armando was actually raised. Armando and Jorge Jr. were raised the entire time in Cuba under the communist regime. And Armando just laughed at it the whole time. He's, if the 3 of us get together in Miami, you'll see, sit around, talk with him, have drink. It's never ending, the stories. But and Mason, he's a Mason, and Masons were very big. I knew this from when I was in a Haitian band, that in Haiti the Masons are very big, and the Masons in Cuba were very big. So this ties into him getting out of Cuba also, but it's another story. So anyways, so the family, most of it comes over in '59, right? When the big exodus happens. Then there's several other waves, and my 2 cousins, Jorge, who was a show horse jiu-jitsu karate. Castro would send him all over the world to demonstrate how good he was. How in the judo, karate. It wasn't quite karate, but probably karate was part of it.
Jiu-jitsu?
A lot of jiu-jitsu.
Judo and jiu-jitsu was the thing once upon a time. I mean, there really wasn't anything else going on in the West besides those 2, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that he was very well known, and he was a show horse that they would send all over. And he was and then when my aunt left, they sabotaged his career. And so he ended up in a little boat, and I think he got in this little boat and ended up with the currents in Aruba or somewhere like that. And my father had to arrange to get him to the States. Armando came later, but he actually flew, but supposedly he was going to get rubbed out, but he found out ahead of time. And so he didn't get off a plane when had he gone off and gone with these guys, he would have never been seen again. So, there's just a lot of intrigue and stories. It gets pretty heavy, but the long and the short of it is, that by the time Castro starts admitting that this is a communist revolution and a communist state, most of the Cubans were taken by surprise. And that's when the big exoduses start. And it's never ended. I mean, if you follow the stories, you go all the way up to when people realized they could jump into the Peruvian embassy's compound and therefore they couldn't be arrested. Do you know that story? That's what started the Marielito boat lift. They just piled in. There were so many people crammed into this compound, and it created a big national interest. And so Castro said, okay, you bastards, all right, I'll let you all leave. And so go home and we'll let you know. And so, they didn't really have much choice. So they all went home, and Castro in the middle of the night came around, rounded them up and said, okay. And he took them down to the boats. Now, many people had signaled to their relatives in Miami to come and get them. And so there was a whole huge flotilla of yachts and stuff coming from Miami. And they were at a certain dock not far from Havana, as a beach. And so what Castro did is he emptied out his prisons. And he said, you got to take these people with you. And so my Aunt Norma was at the other end, right, in Miami, receiving them, right? She volunteered to be. And I remember her telling us, going, oh, my gosh, you should see some of the stuff coming out of there. Castro, he pulled it off on Carter, right? Carter, the sucker.
Right, so but it looks like the Chinese are about to do it with Hong Kong and Britain. I mean, wouldn't that be exciting? It's not like the Chinese didn't know about this technique, Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, that's an aside. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Anyways, there's I was with my family on a little cruise, right? That my father took us on, and we were, and all of a sudden the brakes go on the ship, and they stop, and it's kind of abrupt, and then we could see the window, another ship. We go out. What was it? Oh my gosh. The ship had to stop because these Cubans were drowning like rats in a little boat. And because the high seas, you can't, there are maritime rules. You can't just let them go. So they hauled them up, gave them clothing and all that. And then they would have to send them back too, which is really bad because they didn't touch land. And so it just shows you how an island that was so besides the political turmoil, Cuba, like they call it, the Perla de las Antilles, the Pearl of the Antilles. It was, it was a really beautiful place, and people went to Cuba, right? Now, like all communist countries, look, Cuba has an ocean around it, so they don't have to build a wall. But what you have is people like in Eastern Europe they have to make walls around their countries like the Iron Curtain to keep their own people in. It becomes like one big prison, and that's what Cuba's become, one big prison. Whereas if they would just let everybody leave at once, there'd probably be hardly anybody left. So it's a real lesson that people know, why do we put the walls at the southern border? Well, because the country is, our democracies and the way our country works, people want to come here. But why do communist countries put walls around them? To keep their own people in, because nobody in their right mind wants to go, right? How many people are immigrating to North Korea?
Right. Well, I have a couple questions that occur to me, if I may. And this is we're just doing a informal back and forth. So I mean, if there's some other point you want to make, cut in and do so, certainly. But one of the questions I've always wanted to ask is, this is just on the heels of the resolution. I mean, it's one generation away basically from the resolution of the Spanish Civil War, and I mean maybe 5 or 6 years more. I don't know.
Yeah,
two. It's not later. I mean, by the mid 30s, or early 30s, mid 30s, the Spanish Civil War is over, somewhere in there. So that's 20 years. I mean, that's a generation.
It's so earlier than that.
Is it?
Yeah, look it up. I should have.
I'm just going to go ahead and embarrass myself with my lack of historical knowledge. Dr. Pohl, Dr. Otto.
I could easily also. The reason I'm saying that is because my grandfather does not have any stories of being in the revolution against Spain, and he definitely would have been the kind of person that would have been there.
Yeah, it ended in 1939. It was 36 to 39. So that's 20 years, man. That's one generation away. So anyway, that's only two.
Because he fought in these other. I guess he was just a kid then.
Right, but here's
my mother was born in 24. Yeah, I got to look into that. That's interesting.
But here's my question for you. Certainly, there were many lessons learned, and certainly in the Spanish world, about revolution and communism and dealing with it. I mean, Franco at that point was still in power, I mean, at the point when, you know, stuff was going on in Cuba with Castro, Franco was not out of power, I think, until the 70s or whatever. So you've got a situation where Cuba had a former relationship with Spain. And I realize, and the viewers should understand too, that I'm just throwing this at you out of the blue. We just decided we we're going to have a chill discussion. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But do you happen to know what Spain's attitude was towards all this? I mean, the first thing that would come to my mind is, wouldn't Franco want to step up and play some role in managing the affairs over there? Was he being kept out because he was still considered kind of I mean, maybe he was just hanging on by his fingernails because he was considered a fascist too, and only because of his neutrality was he, you know, not completely deposed. It just seems strange to me that with Franco in power in Spain, that there was not some Spanish move to influence things in Cuba. Now, again, I'm asking you about this out of the blue, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts or anecdotes.
Well, remember, that was a vicious civil war in Spain, really vicious. And when I did my dissertation work traveling through Spain, that is not been forgotten. So the communist element in Spain is huge. So actually, right during the Franco era, Franco would have wanted nothing to do with helping any communist regime in Cuba.
Oh, I mean, helping to put it down. Helping to put it down and stop it.
For him to go back into, after the country had been so humiliated by the United States and driven out of Cuba, no, he wouldn't have had.
I imagine he probably was washing his hands because
he wouldn't have touched it. He wouldn't have touched it.
The North Atlantic powers didn't want him getting.
I have an uncle. I have another uncle that went to Spain. See, all of my family didn't come to Miami. Most of them did. Some went to Venezuela, and one uncle went to Spain, but not as a refugee. He went to Spain as a scholar. And then when he got there, like so many Cubans, if they get off by whatever ruse, you know, they don't go back. So my uncle married a Cordobesa, a lady from Cordoba, and I met him there, and he was a mathematics and science teacher. And in fact, I met him when I was in Spain the last time. So, but
so the Spain
the
dimension
element is strong in Spain, really strong.
Yeah, and that's what's so strange to me too, is that, you know, Franco basically disappears, and then suddenly conservative Spain is gone outside of Rocio events or something. I mean, are they really all gone? I realize this is a tangent, but you've done that.
No, they're not gone. They're not gone, but it's 50-50. You know, the Vox party is rising. You know, and one of the greatest speeches I heard, you know, it's kind of why I got the inspiration for my racist fascist, even though I was always yelling that anyways, sarcastically. He gives a great speech. I forget the guy's name.
I've seen one of them, the Vox guy.
Right?
Yeah.
You do this and you do this, and what? You're a fascist. You do this and you do this. You're a racist. And you know, but the tactic is just used in Spain to the utmost. And the Communist parties, especially where else, right? The universities, which is why my uncle got a job in the universities. They figured he was a communist, but actually, when he came over, he let them know he wasn't and got his ass out of there. But actually, he still has a position though. Yeah, that's right. I think he got around to it by marrying a Spanish lady, and that's how he kind of smoothly negotiated that.
Well, this is from Otto Pohl, a fellow non-left-wing PhD holder. His specialization is on German populations in the former Soviet Union and Russia, as well as some few other things, I would imagine. I don't think he's strictly a one-trick pony, but he sort of Spain under Franco refused to embargo Cuba, and Castro had 3 days of official mourning in Cuba. Hang on, Castro mandated 3 days of official mourning in Cuba when Franco died in 75. So that's
you can see how odd that would be, right? But, you know, strange bedfellows. Franco had to go tooth and nail, blood. In fact, Valencia never fell. Valencia's was when they had to negotiate the final. So the communists knew they had lost, but Valencia never really surrendered. They had to sign the whole peace treaty for the Civil War, and it was done offshore. And guess who actually ran? Who was Franco actually discussing with? Who was he negotiating with? The Communist International Party. Well, that's how much Spain was a complete proxy war. and of course, Franco got labeled as fascist when really he did not want any help from the Germans.
Right, but you have to admit
he had to take it, the Guernica thing, but that was not really what he wanted to do, right?
Condor legions really helped out, right?
Say that again?
Those Condor legions really helped out, right?
Yeah, we had that Lincoln Brigade on, coming from America and the whole thing with Hemingway. But he had to play a delicate rope, a tightrope. And so he was not a fascist. On the other hand, he couldn't actually go too harsh against Germany because he had a communist uprising he was dealing with. Right. So
he was not in a position to be getting involved in that sort of adventurism in the later years.
No, if he didn't do the embargo, which is true, Spain never did embargo Cuba. However, it didn't do Cuba any good either. There wasn't all that much to. I mean, it helped a little bit. The main thing that kept Cuba afloat was the Russians.
Right.
Once the Russians got involved, they poured money and tons of money into Cuba and arms and everything.
Let me come at a different direction. This is still a question that's in my mind because so many people from the Russian Civil War fled. Many of them fled to Spain. One of the guys I studied as a kid was Nestor Makhno from the Ukraine. The famous anarchist, famous for using the tachkani, the little wagons tied to the back of a horse team with a Lewis gun or some sort of machine gun mounted on them. Known for nomadic tactics on the steppes of what's now the Ukraine. He split after he had his ass kicked by the Reds and took a bullet through the jaw and went to Spain he went to France, but his hope was to get down and get involved with the fighting in Spain. So basically you see a number of people coming from the conflicts, the communist conflicts between the Reds and the Whites, and people getting kicked out, obviously lots of whites, but also alternative flavors of radical groups that just the Bolsheviks didn't want around anymore. They fled. I don't doubt that, like Makhno, many of them got involved in the Spanish Civil War as a place to sort of try their experiment again. And it seems to me that it's very likely that a number of those people in turn overflowed over into in Cuba and had something to do with it, with their last gasp in their later years. I don't know. That's a guess. That's something I'm interested in.
Yeah. It'd be a fascinating subject. Certainly the revolution itself was, with the exception of Che Guevara and a few others, was very, very homegrown. Cubans fought it. You don't
think they had advisors in there helping them when they were up in the mountains so that they could deal with Batista's forces?
They might have, but to my knowledge, that would be very, very rare. Most of them were Cubans. They had to draw from the population. Castro had too few men. When he went up there, he only had like 40 people with him, if that many. And they swelled by the campesinos, mostly campesinos and others, and then people who with money would send money to them. My family,
basically translated as field hands.
People, just country people, farmers, people who lived out in the Sierras and in the mountains, people who lived in the countryside, and then people from the cities too. And they would slowly made their way up to the mountains to join him. So were there people from the other conflicts that would have gone there? It's that would be a cool thing to look into, and I really don't know. But I never heard of anything like that. I said most of the people that fought it were drawn from the Cuban population, to my knowledge. Well, and I was going to say about if Castro did that little homage to Franco, that's just weird. Because on the other hand, the rise, it's just bizarre. The Communist Party is very strong in Spain. So why he would want to antagonize them by declaring 3 days mourning for Franco, other than maybe Castro, because he's a Gallego, felt some kind of affinity? I don't know. I can't imagine that. That is very bizarre to me.
Or it's a way for him. Again, I don't know about the subject, but if Polt's to be trusted, and I believe he is, then it would perhaps indicate maybe he's walking a tightrope or taking a middle position to seem to be much more moderate than he is. To not be as far left.
Franco guys? No, man, that doesn't. The whole thing sounds weird. I'd have to look into that and find out what the hell he was thinking, because he's a hardcore diehard communist by then. And Franco hated the communists. So what the hell? Castro is doing a 3-day mourning for For Franco? Have you ever talked to any Spaniard who's an anti-Frankist, by the way? There's some flamencos, the guy, the Spaniard, up in New York. Man, they hate his guts. You bring up Franco and they're just, this is now, 2010,
Right.
2020. Now you bring up Franco to a number of Spaniards that are here in America, and oh my God. So I just can't imagine what the hell Castro was thinking.
Well, now here's another thing. There's got to be something about actually having been there. That old saw that I'm always hammering on. I've mentioned it to my friend Tim too. It's the Turkish saying about Nasruddin Hoca, who's up on the roof and he tumbles off the roof and lands on his back and he's all fucked up on the ground. He's an old man. His wife comes running up and says, Nasruddin, you fell off the roof. Oh my God, I'm going to call you a doctor. And he says, stupid fucking woman, don't call me a doctor. Go find someone who fell off a roof before. Right? You come from this background of having been there and smelled it, right? There has to be something from being in the streets and seeing the people chanting that way, and then knowing through your own experience and your family's experience how the country subsequently transformed.
Exactly, and I see where you exactly.
So given our current
and one of the things that you'll learn about every communist revolution is because I've told this before, Marxism is an engineering project. It has nothing to do with equality. People need to get that out of their skulls. That's the matador cape being dangled in front of the public bull. Equality. We don't have time to go into all that, but it's an engineering project. You cannot engineer a population by consensus, right? How could you possibly get everybody to agree how you're going to engineer them? And that's why I use that kind of extreme version right from the Clockwork Orange. The guy's half pig. And by the way, we're seeing that right now with
Oh Lucky Man. That's Oh Lucky Man. Yeah. The scene where he throws the bank back.
From Clockwork Orange.
No, if
where
it's
the guy
Malcolm
stumbles down the hull and he opens the door.
The sheet back and he sees the pig person looking.
That's a cheap person, yeah.
Yeah, that's from Oh Lucky Man.
No,
it's another Malcolm McDowell, but it's Oh Lucky Man.
But it's in Clockwork Orange.
No, it's not. Chat, tell us if it's true. Oh, I know about that scene because I found it very powerfully affected me.
And it's right about McDowell doing. Okay, well.
No, Clockwork Orange is the one where he's talking about Red Cravi and Tall Chucks and the Moloko Milk Bar, and
they're conditioning him with the music, and then he breaks out of there and he gets out in time and he walks down the hall. Okay, well, anyways, what you see is that now,
basically the way in which they seize power, and it's a social engineering experiment, and they can't do it by consensus.
Right, but what I was saying is that Planned Parenthood is now moving into sex transitions, right? And I knew that. I knew that was going to happen. That would be the next place because it's the whole thing. Abortion obsession is really up towards engineering the population. So we get to the idea is to engineer the population. So you must lie to them. You can't possibly tell them that that's what you're going to do. So every single revolution, the people wake up one day and realize that they've been lied to. And this is what happened in Cuba. They sold them on this equality. They sold them on the game of getting away from really a vicious dictator. Batista, by the way, was a person of the people. He was he was not wealthy. He was a sergeant in the army, and he rose to power that way. But whatever, it was a patriotic for Cuba, for nationalism for Cuba, and to make Cuba equal and with the rest of the world and bring its prestige. And then the people are slowly wake up to the fact that, oh, wait a minute. Now we're suddenly captives here because it's an engineering project and they're what's going to be engineered.
Well, let me ask you this. How long did it take them to realize it? I mean,
not long. Not long.
But how long? How long did it take?
59 is my family, right? And scores of others, an entire wave came over in 59. So there was already hitting the fan. And then from then on, it's been never ending. There's been wave after wave after wave. And he has to stop it, and then he has to let them go enough so that they don't cause too much trouble. If it boils over too much, he lets a few more out, and he keeps playing that game.
When did he first come into power? 59 was the first major wave out. Let me take a look here. When did he come into power? Because I want to get a sense of how long it takes the population to notice, how long they wait.
Oh, no, it's like 56, isn't it? The 55, 56 when the revolution. Yeah, look it up right now. I'll be quick.
Cuban Revolution.
I'm 6 years.
Revolution began in 53, and continued sporadically until the rebels finally ousted Batista on the 31st of December, 58. So if everybody left in 59, it's within a year. So it's a year or less.
Yeah, it's startling. And it's very startling with my family because they fanatically loved Fidel. When I was in Cuba, I remember that the whole family talking about him like he was just a hero. They loved him. And then shortly after, 59, wait a minute. Me and I left in 59. My family came over in 62.
Okay, that makes sense because it looks like if they came in 59, it's still, a couple, 3 years later. But it looks
my mother brought us out in 59, already smelling around. The big wave came over in 61, 62 in that era.
26th of July movement later reformed on Marxist-Leninist lines, becoming the Communist Party of Cuba in October of 1965. So they waited about 5 years to fully declare what they were doing. But that sounds to me, like from what you're saying, that the population in waves and in degrees, certain groups.
In 65, I was in Venezuela, and I'm pretty sure my grandmother they were already in Miami. Like I know they were.
So it was 5 years for everyone to get the picture. But in as much as a couple of years for the early.
Oh yeah, people started to notice within a year or two, and the first waves came over 3 or 4 years later. That he moved quickly. I mean, he started taking over all of the industries. He started appropriating. He started letting them know that he was a communist. So it happened very quickly.
Well, here's another question for you. I heard, if you watch, as I did before I had this discussion, just to make sure I was up to speed on it, because I know almost nothing about it. You know that this is not my area. But indeed, most areas are not my area. But there was there are a number of clips that I watched that were like, 3 minutes to understand the Cuban Revolution and, this sort of thing where you can watch little 5-minute clips and 3-minute clips. And the vast majority of them, at least on YouTube, unsurprisingly, kind of try to take a balanced attitude where they say, okay, well, Castro did a few questionable things, but he did some really
the only thing they say was good is, he made the population was literate.
Oh, the other one that they do is that he nationalized the property that was used by foreign corporations. But that it's all bullshit.
Yeah. He did that, but
one of the other
with them made him totally unproductive.
Sure,
Cuba can't even make cigars well. They couldn't even grow sugar well by the time this idiot takes over.
I mean, come on. I don't doubt it. I'm not endorsing these claims. I
I've heard them all too. Then the hotels went to shit. You can say what you want about the mafia, but look what the mafia did for Las Vegas. I mean,
no, that's actually what I was going to come to next. One of the things they said is that they got rid of the mafia. But now,
is that good? I don't know.
Hang on. For a long time now, it has seemed to me highly likely. I mean, it's Tim who mentioned to me one time that if you want to understand what Russian intelligence services are doing abroad, that you have to take a look at what the so-called Russian mafia is doing, because organized crime is essentially indistinguishable, and perhaps in many cases intentionally so, from the operations of intelligence services, right? So let's not say that organized crime is the same thing as intelligence services, but what kind of agents or actors in the world are in a better position to take advantage of organized crime than intelligence services? Because they're already operating. Right, or you get compromising information on people who are doing drugs or banging children or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like a natural fit. So when I think about something like the mafia, and we see these movies, where a bunch of Italians get the big idea under the suggestion of a Meyer Lansky type that they should all go to Cuba and set up shop there because they can get a real rub each other's backs kind of thing. The thing is, the mafia is involved with all kinds of unions. I mean, otherwise, why did Jimmy Hoffa disappear, right? And we know that unions are not necessarily a place to go if you don't want to trip over a fucking commie, right? Mm-hmm. So it occurs to me they talk about how he got rid of the mafia. Here's my question for you. I'm sorry, it's a lot of build up to this, but I had to provide some context. Do you know anything about, or have you ever considered the possibility that the mafia went there as a phase one of commification of Cuba? And then, in fact,
it would be a theory of, I would think that my Cuban family would be really onto this, especially some of the ones that are really, really into, I would have heard this, but again, I could ask. But
There's no
no, I think they
scuttlebutt
really
about
just
that.
were. I mean, there was mostly the Jewish mafia. You know, was the strongest.
Well, Jewish in
Probably
cooperation
here
with
too, right?
Italian.
Yeah, and they made a sweet deal with Batista. Yes, that's true. But the mafia generally doesn't mess with the population. Say what you want about them, they're only dangerous to each other. They're rarely dangerous to the population at large. They don't oppress people. They could care less.
That's a fair point, because also who definitely would communists get rid of right away? Competition. So yeah, the mafia would have to go. So that's rather a weak point in my.
Yeah, I think they just got rid of them because, you know, they were foreign. They made a lot of money. Batista had a deal with them, and they took over the entertainment business because the entertainment business is so big in Cuba. Was so big in Cuba, right? And some people, like I got in this fight with a lady. Remember the bar Café Citron? This Venezuelan communist lady came in there, and she was going on, you know, about she was a Chavez follower, and went on about how Cuba was you know, the whorehouse of the Antilles or whatever. And I said, well, at least the whores got paid well back then. And then I ran some other stuff in her face, and her son and them, that, you know, that might have led to how I finally got fired from that. I don't know, but this stuff gets intense, right? Havana was doing beautifully, and the music, right? Have you seen the Buena Vista Club? So there's two things I would like to bring to you.
Some of the documentary. I'm not into the music, so I didn't watch much of it.
Right. So there's the story of Arturo Sandoval, which is fascinating, and here this ties a little bit to you too, because Dizzy Gillespie could make a phone call and get the CIA in Athens on his phone, and helped Arturo Sandoval get out of Cuba and not come back, get asylum. That's very interesting.
Athens, Greece, or Athens, Georgia.
Right. He was on tour. He was in Athens, Greece. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So, so the clubs, the nightclubs, the music was so rich. It was so, Cuban music is so famous. And then there is, when the Buena Vista Club came to America, it was the old style pre-Castro music. So the universities did not support it at all. You would think they would have. Cuba.
About this, or I heard
they did not. They could care less about the Buena Vista Club. They didn't get any dates, you know, like touring the universities, and maybe they didn't want them either. But that's a whole interesting story to tell you how culture starts to implode almost immediately. Since then, the Cubans have come up with this music called the Nova Trova, new song. It's just shit. And when you think, ask any musicians about Afro-Cuban music, and it's one of the high water marks of world music. Even describing it as it's a high watermark. The whole world who loves music, Afro-Cuban music, is extremely famous.
Absolutely. And it informs indeed all the like Palos, as you well know, since you taught me almost all of what I know about it. You know, it comes back and it informs things like Guajiras and the rest. You know, it's so potent that it is incorporated into other very rich traditions.
Like the rumba. So it just imploded. But those casinos, okay. There was prostitution. There's prostitution everywhere. There was all those things. You can say that, but nonetheless, the musicians loved it. They made a really good living. The hotels were beautiful, and now they're shit. So, okay, he drove the mafia out. Great. And what did he replace it with? Shit. Whereas at that time, they were destinations for people from all over the world.
Right. Yeah, that it's a very different world. There was a chick I knew when I was in Turkey who had gone. She had an American mother, so she spoke perfect English, but it was strange. She sounded like an absolute native English speaker, but then she just didn't know these whole bands of vocabulary, you know, because she'd been raised by her mother. It was very strange. It was one of our first experiences of the different ways in which people can be familiar with a language. You know, I finally got exposed to it. We Americans are stupid. You know, we don't travel a great deal. We don't get exposed for the most part to people who are, you know, speaking different languages at different levels and multilingual and the rest. But anyway, she had, for that reason, she stuck it in my mind. But she had done a trip to Cuba under her Turkish passport because her father was Turkish, and she took a bunch of photographs at the time. I remember this was in the 90s, and it was just shitloads of 1950s vehicles. And I was like, "What's up with that?" And she's like, "That's the last cars that they got. You know, they're still keeping them running. You know, I mean, I'm sure that they had more modern
things. Because they love the American cars. The Russian cars are so shitty; they don't even bother keeping them running."
right?
Oh yeah, they're famous for that. Cuba's famous for keeping up the American Chevys and Fords. They love them, and they've masterminded how to keep those things running, and they look beautiful. Yeah, that's like I said, Americans were not disliked at all until Castro kind of forced them to dislike them, and really under the surface, they never really bought into it. Like my cousin Armando, when he came over, he grew up there. And he comes over here, his favorite, loved the Beatles, he loved rock and roll, he loved, he wasn't supposed to, but he listened to it on the sly. And it just.
Do you think that's the case? Do you think that's the case for people who live there now? I mean, it's easy to say that, for example, about someone who fled to the United States, but do you think that people?
Yeah, but he fled recently. He was raised there his whole life.
It still indicates
he came over as an adult. Oh, you say that? Well, I'm sure there's some diehards there, but I'll give you another example. There was a fellow that was an ecologist, does some really wonderful work with the voladores in Mexico, and he did some work in Afghanistan with transvestites group, India, and so he went to Cuba, and he's very left of center, right? University guy, he's got to be, and he told me that he was very disappointed. And one of them was they were having carnival. Right. And on Carnival, he was sitting around it, waiting to see, this should be really exciting and fun. The band's going to get up, they're going to play through the streets. And they were all sitting around playing dominoes and smoking cigars, looking at their watch. And the guy's going, yeah, man, aren't you, we're going to get out there. And he goes, yeah, we're going to. Mm-hmm. And then it came time, they looked at their watch, they went outside, blah, 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 walked down the street, came back. And it's like they didn't give a shit. And he said this was kind of typical, that it's lethargic, and he was disappointed, right? Because he was a socialist, he was definitely leftist, and what he saw was that nobody was enthusiastic about the regime. Nobody. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that benefit. I'm sure there's always the cheerleaders, but if you just go to the rank and file people, no, they're not happy, which is why they risk their lives continuously to get the hell out of there.
And
we had to stop a ship in the middle of the water, in the middle of the ocean, to get a boatload of Cubans.
Let me insert something here just real quick. Quebecois foie gras. Why are you talking shit about my guest? Why? Please don't do that.
No.
Okay, go on. So
what did he not like?
It's just he's still going with this fucking Jewish theme, which is just like, jogger, please. And it's rude.
Yeah, I don't know where he's going with that. I've heard, the Jewish, like I said, my Cuban family, there's no Jews, so I don't know what he's talking about.
It's something about your remark about saying at least the horse got paid well has got to be the most Jewish thing I think I've ever heard. And I'm like, anyway, some of these people are a little bit wound up.
Yeah, so what I was saying was I meant it as they were living well, they're eating, and now they're begging for crumbs, right? From tourists from other countries. I guess that meant requires a great deal. It went over his head. Sorry. But anyways, that's enough of that. I was trying to insult the lady, and I succeeded in insulting her. She got furious. Yeah, so, so anyway, so that's the revolution started off fantastic. Like I said, my family loved Castro, and then died hating his guts. And they always thought they were going to go back to Cuba. They never thought that they would that it would last that long. They were heartbroken. My grandfather and grandmother never thought that they were going to die in America.
Well, I have two questions. They never learned English very well. Two questions that I want to jump into, and then maybe we can turn to taking questions from the audience in a bit here. But the first one I want to ask you about is this is probably a quick and easy one, so I'll do this one first. What do you think the prospects are for Cuba now that we are told Biden is the president, and he's certainly occupying the office? And under Obama, they had done quite a bit to try to open things up there, and then under Trump, a lot of that got shut back down again. Are you hearing any kind of murmurings in the Cuban community regarding what's likely to happen?
It's going to be tough. It's always been difficult because if you open things up, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal here in America and you open things up for Cuba because you think you're doing a good deal. The fact is, the regime, to stay in power, cannot open up. It doesn't matter if we want to or not. They can't. If they open up too much, that's the end of the regime. So that's really the impediment, even more than our side. So whatever Biden does, my family is not for my family was for either, strangling them till they collapse, and nobody really wants to, some of them are too harsh that way. But maybe have we never taken the refugees to start with? Maybe if we had made them stay there, things would have boiled over and that regime would have been gone a long time ago. What they do is they as soon as the steam builds up to an almost explosive level, they let it off and they let another wave out. So in a way, it's kept them in power. So the idea that even if we have a more liberal, whatever, we use liberals in big quotations, of course, whatever Biden wants to do, it's not up to Biden, because the regime there cannot afford to just open up Cuba. That's not going to happen.
Well, then I have a second question, which is what kind of impressions, based on what happened there, what kind of impressions do you have relative to what's happening here and in other places around the world, and what sort of lessons can be drawn from that?
Yeah, there it was very sudden, and it was not subtle, right? But it started off as a glorious national revolution, and then it was the wool was pulled over the public eye, and then it was relatively quickly, as we talked about, the facade was let down, and then it was absolute repression. Prisons filled up, people were arrested, and it became a police state overnight. This will not happen here, but we're seeing that it's happening way faster, so that my family, I remember Armando called my mother a few years back, actually, under Obama, and he started seeing how things were going, and he said, holy shit, Aunt, where am I going to go now? I came here to get away from this. If you talk to anybody who has gone through a communist revolution, Polish people, Venezuelans, Cubans, they look at what's going on here and they want to slap the American and go, Jesus, can't you see this? But no, we don't see it. We should, though. One of the things that I pointed out, one of the secret things was back in the early 1900s, it was so obvious because there was no need for it not to be. The Russians were pouring money and teachers and union activists openly. It wasn't a secret. Remember, and I said that thing, there was a guy running for president of the name, Communism is the New Americanism. So it wasn't subtle. It didn't go underground until McCarthy. And then it became progressive liberalism, and now it's much more cunning. But even with this cunning, people who come from communist nations look at what's going on, and they just look at people like me and go, holy shit, don't you see this? I say, yeah, I see it, but most of the population doesn't.
Yeah, well, for some reason, yeah, it's only when you've experienced it. I've noticed a similar thing, as I've mentioned in other streams with other people, when talking to folks who were came out of former Yugoslavia. They have a sense of what can actually happen because it did,
Right,
and so
right.
this idea of what can happen or what can't happen and all the rest, that as they're called normies, these notions that the normies labor under, that, that could never happen here, or that's not what's happening. People who
that's not communism. Like, and these people see it so clearly because they know the signs. They know how to read what's going on with the vocabulary and the narrative. They can see right through the narrative and go, oh yeah, they use that on us. Okay. The identity politics, all of this, they've already seen it. And so when they see it here, it's so obvious. But they've got our education system now right down to the primary schools. So holy shit.
All right. Well, how do you feel about taking questions from the audience?
It's a great idea.
I've banned a couple of them just because they're being assholes, man. It's like, come on, Now we have one question that's a little bit obnoxious, but it's at least phrased politely. So, what is your position on? Do you support nationalism, and what's your position on usury?
Wow, you got a lot of guys on the whole Jewish thing, big time. Okay,
Yeah.
usury is a. Remember that when JC, that's Jesus the Christ, the one time that he lost it was in the temple,
Right,
against
drive
the
the
money
money lenders out of the temple. Yeah.
So obvious, the question is, what are the money lenders doing in the temple? Well, contraband is one of the greatest ways to make huge profits. So the Jews had this thing against usury. And I think the rest of the world, whereas the priesthood practiced it, right? They banned it for everybody else, but not for them. But is usury simply money lending at a profit, or is it extreme profit? In other words, can you do it? Can you have interest, but as long as it's reasonable, it's not usury? Some people say no. The Muslim nation, I think, in general, say no. Usury is usury. If
they come up with all kinds of cute ass ways to get around
it. Of course, because it's too useful, right? Aristotle said, when money begets money like an animal, it's he had a bad name. He hated it. So I think interest at a reasonable level is useful.
It could be all right.
Right. But so I don't know how to interpret the word usury. If you mean usury by extorting your pound of flesh out of everybody,
I think he's just being an asshole. So you're getting trolled a little bit by taking it seriously. But here's a much more important question, I think, which is, do you support nationalism?
This is a big, big dilemma with everybody, because we're seeing that the forces being arrayed against us are such that we may have no choice but to become ultra-nationalistic. And then we're just going to have to own it. We're going to have to say to people, okay, well, you're right. Are we pro-Western civilization? Yes. Does that mean we're pro-white? Okay, all right. And at some point, we're just going to have to take it, accept it, and then lock and load. And take what's on.
Lock and load, metaphorically speaking, in Minecraft. Oh. Yes, absolutely. We're talking about basically fortifying our spirits and to take a strong position and say that, yes, we'll stand our ground ideologically.
Lock and load an actual.
Absolutely. However,
of course not.
Nationalism, in the sense of whether or not a national group or people is in a position to defend their territory and their traditions and their ways of life, is that something that you support?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's an answer.
I support it. There's no way around it unless you want to be annihilated.
Right.
That's the alternative. What we're getting. We're getting to the point that either we acknowledge that nationalism is not a choice, or we simply roll over.
So and I'll leave it to the person who asked this question, David Smith, if you want to rephrase the part about usury so that it actually is a question that's more specific, like charging interest on a loan. Is that?
Oh, you just asking me, do I like Jews?
Yeah, I don't. There you go. Let's move on to another one and see what we have. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to back up here, people, in order to get to where I just dropped out and it threw a new one in. God damn it. Now I'm scrolling back trying to find out where. Fuck. Okay, let's do this just in case I miss these questions, because I'm scrolling back here through the list and I'm not seeing them as easily. No, I found it. Okay. So I'll start from there. The next one is from John Grauerholtz, Mr. Mean Spirited. Says, ask your guest about the role of Santeria and other Afro-Cuban religions in the opposition to Fidel Castro.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, well, I have a number of family members not my immediate family, but very close, who practice Santeria. And I even had interviews. I used to study Boudin a long time ago. I went down to New Orleans. That's a whole long story.
Back in the day, right?
Yes, I went down to New Orleans and met with. But anyways, the Santeria of it's very strong. It's very strong. Now, you may or may not know that the Haitian Revolution was started off with a Rara rite, which is the Rara was the most ferocious of the spirits, and it was actually more Caribbean than what they call the more civilized rites that were actually from Africa. Now, some people have contested that, and I don't really want to get into it, but it was a voodoo rite that actually launched that revolution. Okay, so what's the role of Santeria in Cuba as opposition to Castro? Well, Castro was smart enough not to try to rub that out. As a matter of fact, he knew better finally than to rub out the Catholic Church either. And I've got a good story about that if you want to hear that. But the Santeria is pretty strong, and it's across the channel. It's crossed over to Miami, and so we have contact with Santeria in Miami, and in Cuba, Santeria is actually going very well. I think Castro just leaves them alone, and they frankly they don't seem to be an organized opposition to Castro. Then again, they don't support it either. It's its own world.
So
Santeria is its own world.
It has enough weight of its own that it must be tolerated by the regime and just sort of operates.
Oh yeah. They would be very unwise to try to stamp that out. That would really not go over well.
Wow, so I didn't realize that. So Santeria is big in Cuba.
Yeah, it's right under the surface of Catholicism.
But I'm not talking about like syncretic manifestations.
I know. But they still overlap, but that's not why. Santeria is its own thing. And then the Regla de Ocho came out fairly recently, and it spread into the United States. But no, Santeria is very strong, and Castro was wise not to try to mess with them.
Okay, so they're still doing their thing, but they seem to, on their part, have been prudent enough not to take a position. And like for example, to your knowledge, Santeria isn't being used by three-letter agencies in the way, for example, like a Falun Gong is in China against the Chinese.
Well, now that you would never know. You'd have to dig into it. But here is something kind of revealing. There's the ladies in white. They have been protesting the disappearances of political activists and prisoners by the regime for 20 years now, something like that. They still go out and protest. And the fact that they're all dressed in white, you could possibly say that there's some relationship, because as you know, the Mambos, the priestesses especially, dress all in white. But I would have to ask about that. In fact, that would be a great conversation for me to have with Armando.
Okay, all right, excellent. Mr. Mean-Spirited, that's what we had in the hip pocket. Let's see here. This, I think, is an invitation to you, Gerard, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm not qualified to talk about it. This is from Jonathan Pohl. He's a guy I've had on, I think I've had him on my channel. I've certainly been on his channel. And he's been a guest on other guys that I like he's been on JF Garapi's channel. He's a bright guy, friend of mine in the sense that I know him from online and have interacted with him quite a bit on Twitter too. Good guy. He's got his PhD from School of Oriental and African Studies. I think that's SOAS or whatever in Britain. And he talks about all sorts of stuff over on his channel. And it looks like, let me see if I can just put it up here on screen so you can see it for yourself. Where is it? Here it is. Do you want to come on his channel to discuss Cuban intervention in Africa in the 1970s? That's something that
I have to do my homework on it, right? This is something I'm aware of, perfectly aware of, and it changed Che Guevara's opinion of black people. That's one thing that it did, for the better. For the better. He was a pretty rampant racist before then, and then the general that was the hero of those wars came back. He was overshadowing Castro, and he was eliminated. So I can do some homework, and I can talk with my cousin Armando. And in fact, maybe even both of us come on the channel. But yeah, that would be a great subject.
Okay, well, that's one where you, I know that you've been looped in with him on Twitter on a couple of messages. So if you go and check there, you'll see his contact information. So
wonderful. Yeah, I would look forward to that. That'd be great.
Got his name there. Okay, let's move on. Excuse me. All right. Next question. Let's see what we got here. Sorry, people. I just got to scroll through here and find one that are phrased. Okay. All right. Here is one from. Let me scroll down. Sorry, I have the normal YouTube window, and then I have the StreamYards window, and I have to. Okay. Here's one. This is from Sarah Connor. Oliver, can you ask what advice he has as far as reversing the path we're on now in the USA? Do we still have a chance to change course before it's too late?
Yeah, well, this is, of course, is what we all think about a lot. I've come up with this notion, and I don't want to toot my horn, techno anarchism, in which what I'm exploring in the same way that the early socialists. It starts off as a mind. I don't know, thought that the only way to do it at first is just to think about it, think it through, in the same way that the early socialists thought about socialism. Okay, so I'm thinking of I call this principle of non-oppressibility. I've looked at centuries, 120 years now at least, of one revolution after another. The Romantic Revolution, and it fills us with lust. We all love this stuff, we want to go out. It's, if we're not raping and pillaging with the Vikings and we're leading a revolution, and it sounds more noble. But in the end, they all go to the same place. And my tentative solution is, it's not a solution, it's an idea. It's to make what I call bolts, where we identify all of the fronts that if you're covered, the price of oppressing you is so steep that you may not be able to completely stop oppression, but you'll make it so expensive that they'll think twice and they may not ever even do it. Now, again, this is, it may sound like now far-fetched or whatever, but socialism sounded very far-fetched when people first started this kind of mind plan where they thought, a thinking game of what if this, what if that, what if we did this, what if we did that? And you see how far it went.
Yeah, I mean, as I pointed out in my own little riffs, I mean, I think about the idea that there are a few despised fringe figures of radical movements plotting in basements in, say, Russia, for example, and they're like, we're absolutely despised and we're being destroyed by the Tsar's police, and we're gonna we're gonna take over the world. How are we gonna do that? And one of them says, let me think about it.
So the technology, what I'm saying is that has technology opened a window for us? Excuse me?
To finish my example, though, let's say, for example, they're sitting there, radicals in a basement, and they have no power, and they're wondering how they're possibly going to overcome the Tsar and his minions. And one of them has the bright idea one day, let's control how people speak. So from these tiny, seemingly insignificant insights about how manipulation may be affected, so
and then the whole theory of language and consciousness, and we saw how that got developed through the universities all the way to Chomsky.
Yeah, they've been fucking us with it ever since. Yes. Yeah,
the mental game starts, the thought process. So I'm looking at, has technology brought us to a point that it's no longer controllable? Because if it's no longer controllable, then technology might be the means for people to come together in communities and take advantage of all the new technologies, such as cryptocurrency it's basically the monopolization of power. The monopolization of power, the centralization, monopolization of power is the only real problem. If you go from the left, you hate the oligarchy. I'm just using generalities. On the right, you hate government. But either way, the problem is the concentration of power, and that from there everything else flows. What if they cannot? Excuse me?
To be fair, your view of the right that you just expressed is essentially a libertarian one, and there are a whole bunch of people. I'm just letting you know out there, because you're now starting to do the circuits, and you're going to see how how large the fangs are, and the people in comment sections and the rest. There's a whole category of people who consider themselves to be very much on the right. I'm not taking a position one way or the other. Not taking a position, but they are definitely not anti-government. They believe in the imposition of order and having the government.
Yeah. No, I'm basically libertarian. Techno-anarchism is what I'm talking about. Is basically a form of libertarianism.
Well, if you're singing the praises of Bitcoin, you're positioning yourself on the political compass for everyone.
Well, 3D printing, because in my company I've been involved with 3D printing. There's a number of revolutionary technologies coming out that may make it impossible for actors such as the state or oligarchies to actually they won't be able to control the means of production. They won't be able to control the money support, the money supply. And so if we can take advantage of that in a strategic way, we can make ourselves non-oppressible. But it has to be strategically placed. And that's what I'm working out. What would be on the bolt of chaos? What would be the fronts that you have to have well covered? And I start off with the first one is information. And Snowden and others have already proven that it may be impossible for entities to keep secrets. Well, right there, if you can't keep a secret, that's half the battle. If we can make it that we can hack anybody, anyone, anywhere, right there, a major part of being oppressed has just been at least mitigated. And so that's where I'm going. A thought experiment is what I'm starting off with.
The idea is that there are various technological avenues that would seem to break the monopoly on power of the establishment or the cathedral or however you want to care.
Of any interested party that wants to oppress and take over and control people, that technology may be coming to the point that we will be able, if we organize in committees and strategize, resist it, or make the price of oppressing us so dear that they won't bother.
I will just throw in for my own part that I tend to take I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think the whole point of view is very 2015 in the sense that it overlooks the many ways. I mean, you can use Snowden as an example. You can use Assange as an example. Those holes, those gaps have been in large part closed off to non-state actors. And look what happened to the people who attempted to do it. So I would not just say, not only, they proved that there's a crack, there's a fissure that can be exploited. But
again, it's a thought experiment, right? We're not there yet. I would not get to the point and say, well, let's do this, as much as let's think this through. Let's strategize it. Because as you said, the gap has been opened, and you say they came after them really hard, right? Why did they come after them so hard? Holy shit, because they realize that there's a real danger to them.
Or they want to make an example of them, And I'm not taking a position. It could be. I think there's definitely some mix of danger involved with it, but it assumes that it assumes the gap that was
the gun, right? The guy who wrote the very brilliant guy. I love this guy. I think it's Come and Take It, or it's about the first guy to 3D print a gun.
Right. This guy who was big. Yeah, he got put in jail for hitting on girls.
It's a tiny little step, right? It's a tiny little step, but holy shit, people went after him. People went after, and now the printing, the CNCing, digital manufacturing is exploding. It's way more sophisticated now than it was then, and that's just one other front, the manufacturing front.
My limits to how much I'll credit the decentralization, but I don't want to get in that fight with you. I'm just throwing in my own.
That's answering her question. That's where I'm going with it. Techno-anarchism, and I have a website dedicated to that.
So there's at present no advice on reversing the path, but you do have an area in which you're trying to think through ways to address it. So nothing yet, but this is the area in which you think an answer might lie.
Exactly.
Let me jump to another one here. This is from Aquila Tempeste. Let me see if I can find that one. There we go. Is the guest aware, and that would be you, sir, of Professor Anthony Sutton? Technology transfers to the Soviets, the Cold War era as an engineered dichotomy merged to create a new global system.
I'm not aware of this guy, no, but from what he's saying there, the Soviets had, to my mind, they've been displaced by the Chinese, and this displacement now of our entire manufacturing center. Had this thing, had Trump not at least stopped it briefly, we would, within 10 years or 15, probably make almost nothing in America. And that, I believe, was engineered. The idea was to totally sell out our blue collar completely, and all manufacturing for the United States would be done abroad and mostly in China. I think the Russians just they fell by the way. I don't know that the Russians are the state actors. I think that's why they get attacked so much by the left now. It's because the left knows the Russians have so much on them because they helped create them, but they're not the power anymore. That's my opinion. Right now, it's China. It's China. It's not Russia.
China has a whole lot more money to throw around.
Way more.
Yeah, like orders of magnitude more. So that's one issue. Yeah. Among the many parties and players.
And they have a plan, right? The Russians had a plan early in the last century. The Chinese have the plan now.
Yeah, and I think the Russians still have plans of their own, but they're not as let's say proactive and intrusive.
I think they're more concerned with Russia. They've become nationalist. That's my opinion. I could be wrong.
Right, and I'm no specialist on Russia.
And answer to the lady's question too. What to do right now? Fight. You have to get out there. You have to make sure that you stand up to the belligerency. You have to make clear you have to make clear your position and let them know that you're not backing down.
Right.
We can no longer make the discussion and the narrative about us defending our position. And this is the big flaw with the Republican Party. We must be completely on the offensive now. Everything you say we are. So what? We're still going to do it, and we're going to shove it down your throat the way you've been shoving it down ours. And we're going to go after you. We have to go after them now. And it won't be pretty.
Lawfully. Yes. Okay, so this is the next one. This is from Men Like Gods. Did Cuban manhood, machismo et alia, change under communism? Have you
That's
seen?
A great question, because Cuban machismo is a big it's a big deal. The trouble is that Castro was such a proponent of machismo that I would say no. Likewise, with the communist revolution in Russia, the manhood of the working class was celebrated as a big deal, even to the point that many communists in the early days thought that homosexuality was an effeminate trait of the bourgeoisie, that the strong working class. Of course, I'm not trying to get into Castro hates homosexuals, by the way, in case if you didn't know that. He imprisons them. So has machismo been diluted by communism? I would say no. So
it's still a thing.
Oh yeah.
All right. So that will not be removed. Okay. Hang on. It says yeah, that's one that's not exactly a question. It just has my name in it. Aquila Tempestate says, guest has not understood the question. Well, reframe it for us and we'll come back to it. And
which question was that?
It was this. Well, look again and see if I can make sense of it. Is guest aware of Professor Anthony Sutton? He said no. I don't understand how that could be misunderstood.
I thought from the way he phrased it was he was talking about globalism as a Russian project. I'm not familiar with Sutton.
Soviets, the Cold War era as an engineered dichotomy. Okay, I'm guessing, but I think what he's talking about is some of the things like I think it was a heavy water reactor knowledge information was shared under either FDR or maybe it was the guy immediately following him. God damn it. It's the president. It comes right after FDR. God damn it.
Oh, we had the atomic atomic formulas trade,
True,
sent over to Russia.
Yeah, there are all kinds of ways. I'm guessing what he's talking about is, first off, no, my guest does not know about Anthony Sutton. But the following part, which is technology transfers to the Soviets, the Cold War era as an engineered dichotomy merged to create a new global system. So I think what he's saying
I would say that's socialist ways. It was done because of socialists here in America collaborating with the Russians.
Right, in order to create a seeming black and white that then seemed to fight in order to always yield dialectical permutations, the result that they
world order. Absolutely. So they couldn't let America become too powerful and become too technologically advanced. So they deliberately sabotaged a lot of our technology over to Russia.
Well, I think from my point of view, I think what happened is they wanted the U.S. to be technologically advanced, but then they'd steal the secrets and use them to lift up everyone else, so that we didn't have the competition. And
exactly.
They could sort of ride on the backs, the same way that many of these countries milk our income. Not that the U.S. Doesn't have its own things of milking other countries for their. I'm sorry, not milking so much, because there's just not enough to be gotten from it, but retarding their growth in strategic ways under the different U.S. administrations. Some of that has been going on. But in many cases, I say screw them anyway. Hammer them. Who cares? Okay, here's one from Nema Problema. And we got about 15 minutes left, Gerard. If you're still good for a few more questions, is that okay?
Yeah, I'm having a blast here.
All right.
The espresso's running freely.
Excellent. This is from Nema Problema. How has femininity been affected under communist Cuba?
Okay. Cuban women have always been very independent and very strong. Don't take my word for it, right? You know, I'm a Caucasian heterosexual male, you know, so you would say, well, that's what they were going to say. I would talk to Cuban women, and I think you'll agree. And this was before the revolution. Women in Cuba were already professionals, well-educated, had lots of positions. So has it been affected? They were always very sexy too. I mean, Cuba was all, you know, there's a certain sensuality that is just so normal in Cuba that there wasn't like a Victorian wall that had to be broken through or anything. They were always very erotic and very self-assertive. So,
but and what you're saying as well, if I understood you, is that also they were moving into formerly male roles that were male-ish roles that were formerly close to them. They were already moving into those things before the communist revolution.
That's what I'm saying. Many of my relatives, the females, the aunts, were already professionals. One of them, I said, owned a gym.
Are they still making babies? Are they still having children? Or has, to your knowledge, in Cuba, has the idea of the woman as actually a mother who has children been stomped all over, as it has, for example, here in the United States?
Well, in a communist society, they're never going to push that too hard because they know that's suicidal. They push that to us. They don't push that to themselves. Now, is there a low birth rate in Cuba? That is a wonderful question. It's never been brought to my attention, and I would think that if they had
if you're looking at like true Cuban ladies, right, to whatever extent you know them, right, like maybe you hear about them from back home, from relatives, you saw some when you were there, when you were younger, you kind of hear it through the grapevine, you get a sense for it. I'm not asking, this is all anecdotal, right, because at this point, you're not going to be held to anything. It's not like we have stacks of statistics. Do you get the sense that they still want to be mothers?
To my knowledge, yes. Has it been de-emphasized to a certain degree? I'm sure it has to some degree, like it's not an obligation. But then again, prior to the revolution, it wasn't an obligation either. Another aunt was a doctor, and she married the son of Edison Marshall, the guy who wrote the book The Vikings, and several others that became films. Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas starred in it. She moved to Savannah, and she never had any children. She was a professional. It wasn't. I mean, nobody said, "What? You don't have any children?" I mean, nobody said anything to her. That was her life.
So it sounds like they were very much on their way to being westernized, just like the U.S. at the point that the revolution intervened.
They were already like, there was something about Cuba that was just, people have misconceptions about it. It was always educated, always literate, and like I said, these aunts. Most of everybody in the family has 3 children, 3 to 4. Not any big baby produce, you know, like 10 or 8. But
3 to 4, that's a whole lot more than you know.
Well, now, yeah, but back then, you know, my mother had 5. Well, you know, one died in infancy, so there's 4 of us. So no, I don't know that that femininity has been altered much in Cuba, but it was a great question, and I'm going to look into that.
All right, fair enough.
It's never been brought to my attention, right? When I talk to my Cuban relatives, it's not an issue.
They're not like, oh, the women aren't women here anymore.
Oh, like if they're talking about the United States?
No. If they're in the U.S. talking about the women back home, they're never like, oh, the women are no longer women.
You mean in Cuba?
Yeah, sorry.
Cuban Americans talking about the women in Cuba. No, that's never been.
So that's not the case. Well, I mean, there's
I haven't asked though. I haven't asked, but I would think, with as critical as they are of the regime, that if that was a point of critique, I would have heard it by now. But let me give it. I think that's a great question. I'm going to go ask. I'm going to ask.
Especially given the machismo, right?
And some of them have come over recently. Remember, within the last 10 years. And one of my Armando's mother-in-law goes back and forth still, and has only now come for the last time. Probably not going to go back. And his wife Mimi. Oh, she was also. Armando met her in karate class. They were doing karate. No, they were doing jiu-jitsu. They were doing jiu-jitsu, and Jorge was doing karate. And Mimi, they have pictures of him and Mimi in their karate outfit. You know, really good-looking people. And so And they had a
Kudos.
child, Wendy. Wendy's beautiful. So, yeah, I just don't. I'm going to ask though. That's a great question.
Okay, so
Since
you're
it's
not
never
seeing.
come up, that's the only answer I can give.
All right, this is one from Noah Solomon. Has the Catholic Church, hello sir, by the way, in Cuba been compromised or co-opted in a similar manner to KGB infiltration of the Orthodox Church in the USSR? Or, I'll add, though he didn't put it in the original question, actually, let me post it up here so you can see it, or as apparently the current Pope seems to have been.
Oh man, liberation theology, don't get me started.
Yeah, so the
Let
question
me
is,
give you a great example.
has the Catholic Church in Cuba been compromised or co-opted in a similar manner to KGB infiltration of the Orthodox Church in the USSR?
Without a doubt, yes. However, there's only so much you can do, right? So let me give you an example. As you know, Pope John Paul II was a labor solidarity union organizer. As a priest, he was very much with the Lewinsky. Look, I forget the guy's name. Lewinsky. He was like one of his mentors. So he was a priest, but he's also very heavily involved in the labor union that helped overthrow the communist regime in Poland. So for some reason, Castro allowed, or maybe there's some kind of deal made that Pope John II got to visit Cuba. And this is the first time, probably maybe the only time you'll ever see Fidel Castro overshadowed. It's caught on camera and it's so obvious. I think what Castro had in mind was that he would let the Pope come over here, and the people would be like very lackluster, as they are about his regime, right? As with the story I gave you about the carnival marchers. So he allowed this to happen. And so there was a parade through the city. I think it was Havana, and then they came into a big soccer field. When the crowds that gathered to greet Pope John Paul II, I think shocked Fidel. He thought he had done a better job.
It certainly dovetails well with that business of him recognizing the death of Franco, though, doesn't it? In the sense of like sort of tipping the hat towards traditionalism. Or
I'm wondering. That baffles me. It really does. So he goes there, and then at the ceremony, Fidel's in the front seats here, right, with the dignitaries, and up on the stage is John Paul II. And John Paul II is giving him also a slight reprimand. But you look around at the crowd, and they're just cheering the Pope as probably they used to cheer Fidel in the early years. And you can tell Fidel is looking around going, holy shit. He was, you could see it in his face. He was shocked. So, yeah, the church is officially under the control of the regime. Absolutely.
But what we're doing is we're coming back around to one of your central theses that I know about, but that you have not presented this evening, which is the idea of the bottom-up grassroots movements, hermandades, and these kinds of things, right? The grassroots bottom-up movements, the lay brotherhoods, and the rest within the church versus the top-down aspect. And so what I think I'm hearing from you is that while the top of the church, so to speak, has been compromised, the bottom-up aspect of
and that is the lifeblood of the church. Like here in the States, the Catholic Church has been so compromised because they stopped the ritual system. That's a whole other discussion. In Catholic Cuba, the ritual system is still alive. Therefore, it generates culture. It generates the religious experience. And that goes bottom up. And so that hierarchy can be up there playing their little game. They can lead the mass. They can do all sorts of things. But the movement is from the bottom up. And so the Catholic Church in a more Catholic nation has a much better chance. Well, like we saw in Spain with the Rocio. We could go on and on about the Rocio and the bottom-up process that people think the priesthood is in charge, and actually they're not. And they don't even realize that the Rocio is not put on by the Catholic Church. It's put on by the brotherhoods.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's very much like politicians, as I've heard it put once. They see when a group forms, and then they run to get up in front of it and act like they've been leading it all the time.
Yeah, well, there's the conciliarios. Yeah, it's a great subject of discussion. But to answer the question, Of course, the hierarchy is appointed by Castro in the church, and they have to approve it. But underneath, if that example of John Paul II's visit is any indication, it's alive and well.
All right. So it sounds like they have failed to completely, I won't say failed completely, but I will say failed to have completely dislodged Santeria, and they have failed to have completely dislodged Catholicism. Though it sounds like they've probably taken some hits, but in terms of
the religion of a culture, it'll implode so quickly, because culture generates, religion will generate culture, the religious experience. Ideology does not. And this is something that even to this day, the cultural Marxists are struggling with. I think we've talked about this, that they're trying to grasp on and create a kind of pseudo-religion out of the climate change. And whether they're succeeded, that I don't know. I've looked at some interesting things lately. Ideologies cannot generate culture, whereas all human culture is generated by religion, by the religious experience, by ritual systems. And again, I don't expect everybody to go along with me. They'd have to go hear me through. But I know it's correct, because there's no such thing as a human culture that is not based in religion. None. There are none anywhere on the planet. They don't exist.
I will tell anyone who is interested in this topic that I have heard Gerard speak about it quite a bit over the years. I remember when you were completing your PhD, and I was spending some time with you
in Richard's place.
Up in DC. Yeah. So I've heard quite a bit about this. It's a subject that Gerard has given a considerable amount of thought to, and I believe, should he be free and available, we are going to be talking about that in future. There is also a further topic that I hope we'll be able to talk to in future, because remember, Gerard's primary focus is not politics. That is not to say that Gerard does that you don't track politics and keep abreast of events that are going on and that sort of thing. But your focus is on ethnomusicology, culture, and the birth of culture out of ecstatic experiences. And the
ecstatic experience is a big part of what I am fascinated with.
Right. And so I almost don't even want to go in any further into it than you just did.
Right.
Other than to say that we will be talking about it in future. And in particular, hopefully within that context, we'll also be talking about a number of ideas you and I have sort of bounced back and forth about in the past. This is your domain, not mine. And to whatever extent I know about it, much like flamenco, it's due really entirely to you, because you were the one who turned me on to it. But the idea of musical forms and how they can be inculcated and grow within cultures, and how they become like sort of fundamental patterns that can be interpreted and reinterpreted. And in fact, I would point
more than interpreted. See, once you go to interpreted, you're putting the language first, and it's the other way around. Experience generates discourse, not the other way around.
This is entirely why I am not qualified to present Gerard's ideas to you, but I will bring him on again to set them forth himself. But in future, I would also like to talk about this aspect of musical forms, and I think it would be of particular interest to people who are into music, because that's Gerard's background. That's where his core. Not that he doesn't have other talents.
It's a treasure trove. Musicians, if they understand the tree of forms, the palo, they're going to really look at that and go, "Damn, it survived all these centuries." And I think it's the way that music came into being as a system. And in Africa, it's still the norm. It's still the norm rather than the exception.
As far as they take it.
In the West, it's not survived so well, except for the flamenco. To my knowledge, the flamenco tree of forms is maybe the last complete system of forms that's still alive and moving through time and history. I could be wrong, especially in Eastern Europe. There could be
there could be variants of it, right? But the Africans, for example, they don't get past pentatonic and polyrhythms, right? I mean, that's pretty much where they go, isn't it?
Don't get past polyrhythms. Holy shit, that's complicated as hell. And they've got lots of forms, and they breathe in forms in the same way we.
Well, they're still operating. From my take, it would be that they're still operating in large part unconsciously. They don't have a great deal of a conscious admixture to the process, and so these forms, as it were,
it's experiential. It's experiential. It's not guided by an intellectual template. It's experiential because the forms themselves breed, break off, depending on experience and situations. Yes. and
Right.
is
And
still alive and well. You know, and
in
spirit
that
possession.
in that respect, a lot of people who would be inclined to dismiss those musical traditions from places like Africa, such as they are, and some of them are highly complex. For example, also using, I mean, you were the one talking about 12 count rhythms from North Africa that you had looked into as sort of like
And all of it,
echoes.
yes, Africa. And
But
9 and 12, yes.
the simple fact that they don't have the intellectual superstructure on top of them means that some of these functions can occur unconsciously without the imposition of what you just gave me a hard time
What I call
about, which is
natural composition. Yes. You change the
Right.
situation and the musical form will change with it. Yeah.
Anyway, people have not been properly prepped for this. I'm sorry I wound off into this, but in future I will be talking with Gerard
Yeah, it's a
about this.
wonderful subject. It really is.
For those who are more interested in this area, which is very much so properly his bailiwick, he has, as I stated at the outset of this discussion, he's got a clip that he put up on his channel, and that channel is JollyScholar888. And on that channel, you can find a 3-part series where he talks about folk music traditions.
Yeah,
in this
Cuba
case,
and the phony folk music. Yeah.
yes,
I haven't put up anything on the deep music and the religious experience yet. That's my next goal. But I did the 3-part, and I got an addendum coming, and it's music and ideology, or music versus ideology.
Yeah, and what I'd really like to see is some stuff on the what is it, the Sacred Harp Singers?
Yes, Sacred Harp. Yes, and also we talked a lot about the processions, right? And Nietzsche's the Dionysian procession. That's a wonderful subject too. That I
yeah,
will be
talking
talking
about that, because as we've talked about in the past, that's where our interest overlap. Rogational processions, territorial processions, right? Marching, but also march as borderlands. Yes,
and marking time and marking space. Yeah,
or even the Catholics or the people waving orange banners in Ireland, getting together to ritually proceed along certain courses that correspond to territories they wish to defend at certain times of the year and places.
And to antagonize. Yes.
That's an area where Gerard's looked at it from the musical perspective, and I've looked at it in terms of animal territory and behavior, and marks and marking behavior. And there's a very interesting overlap there, which hopefully we'll cover in future.
Wasn't there?
Yeah,
how absolutely. We came to a very similar place from two opposite sides.
Yes, and we're both mad enough to discuss these topics. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I definitely thank you for jumping in. I appreciate you coming in, except for those, the tiny handful of people who just, for some reason, wanted to fucking give my guests shit, which, yeah, just fuck, come on, man. Thank you all for coming in, and I definitely recommend you check out his channel, JollyScholar888. I will be talking to him again in future. I appreciate all of you coming in, especially at this late hour. It's now 2 in the morning or whatever. So thank you very, very much for checking it out. As always, I appreciate the support for the channel. I appreciate you being on, Gerard, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And there were some great questions too.
Yeah, well, there'll be more, and get ready, because you are now proper. A lot of people don't understand. Gerard has done quite a bit with social media, but he has not done a YouTube channel at present.
So there's a YouTube. The YouTube channel's up there.
You have it, but you have not done a bunch of live streams where you have to deal with comment
Oh
sections.
no, I've never done this. No.
Prepare. It will be exciting for you.
Well, I'm getting a little bit of that. Am I a Jew? Jeepers.
Yeah, you will be baptized. You will be baptized in fire. It will be good for you. Yeah, so okay, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for being here. As always, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, one and all. I am Semiagog, and I am out.
Thank you.